record. All right, now let's see. Take two.
Take two.
And take a drink.
Welcome, everyone. It is 6:20 on Monday night. You're listening to the 177th installment of the Age Out Angels Radio Hour, right here on www.hamiltonradio.net, Channel 2. I'm your host, Gregory Kaur. I'm the founder and executive director of Age Out Angels. We're a 501c3 nonprofit corporation. Age Out Angels provides one-to-one mentors to vulnerable youth for the purpose of coordinating the care and services that they need to thrive. We try to help young people avoid some of the horrible pitfalls that they're likely to face when they don't have a proper safety net. This program is brought to you every week at the same time, courtesy of Doc G, William Saunders, Ruben Rodriguez, and all the fine people here at Hamilton Radio who allow us to use this airtime. Ruben is on the big board tonight, as always. Robin is producing, as always. And as always, it is so wonderful to have both of you with me. And thank you so much at home for tuning in. Many different things to talk about tonight, but this is a big night for us tonight because Facebook died this afternoon, at least for several hours. And that has put us in the wonderfully interesting position of beginning our first week of broadcasting over the YouTube, our new YouTube channel. So I hope you will all look for our notices in social media and go to our YouTube channel and hit the subscribe button and the like button and whatever buttons there are to hit except the dislike button. You could also put comments into the comments field on the YouTube channel. So many of the same things that we could do on Facebook, you can do on YouTube, but you don't have to belong to anything in order to see the program. So a lot of things to tell. This is Domestic Violence Awareness Month. October is Domestic Violence Awareness Month. And also I learned the other day from my friend Tim Grill that this is also Spina Bifida Awareness Month. And so a shout out to Tim for making us aware of that. You know, my one of my other comedian friends, James Heskey, always used to say that if Facebook ever went down, there would be people walking the streets with the food that they had just made in their hands saying, please, everyone, look at my casserole. And that's what I assume is happening right now in the streets all across America and around the world. But tonight, we are here to talk about several issues, not the least of which is domestic violence awareness. And one of those is going to be that story about Gabby Petito that's been in the news, captivating the attention of the country for what, about 2 or 3 weeks now. And you know, the question is, the way she was portrayed in the police video was maybe as being a little bit off, huh? And is that true, or was she a victim of domestic violence? We'll unpack that tonight. We're also going to talk a little about New Jersey's Administrative Office of the Courts and their statistics on domestic violence. And then if we have time later, I'm going to tell you a little bit about the war between the people who are into the vaccine and the people who are the anti-vaxxers, and answer the burning question on everyone's mind: should we just get guns and shoot each other? That's important. And then if there's time after that, we'll talk a little bit about solution-based casework, talk about whether or not that is going to be effective in situations where domestic violence is prevalent. Can we pack that all into an hour? Hell no, but we'll try. With that in mind, anyone would like to add to the discussion, whether it's positive or negative. If you're listening on the radio, you're welcome to call in. Don't be afraid. I'll say the number in a minute. And we usually post numbers on my Facebook page because the things that we talk about can really trigger, you know, sort of deep feelings. And so I'm going to say this number slowly if you need it. If you are in a situation of domestic violence, there's a phone number to call. It's 1-866-331-9474. You'll speak with a trained peer advocate. And just please be very, very careful. Use that phone number on the sly. Do not use that phone number as a weapon. Don't hold it up to a person who's abusing you and say, look, I'm going to make this phone call to 866-331-9474. 9474. That is not the right way to go about it. You will do more harm than good to yourself. So I want you to think about that. That number again is 866-331-9474. If you're in a situation of domestic violence, you can get out. And you know, that's something that really came up this week twice, actually, in Age Out Angels. We found that two of the people that we're working with, the young people, were involved in instances of domestic violence. And I'll talk about that in just a minute. But please take a moment. If you're looking at us on YouTube or anything anything else where there's a share button, please hit the share button. It's very important that you tell everyone in your world what we're talking about. This stuff needs to be shared, and you're not going to hear about it on the nightly news. You're just not. So please share what you're hearing and stay with Hamilton Radio if you're listening on the radio all night long. The best music in the world. Pledge drive going on for Hamilton Radio. If you go to www.hamiltonradio.net at any time on the welcome screen, you'll see a chance to make a donation. I love these guys. I'm so happy that we're sort of moving the platform over to YouTube and that they are the ones who are doing it with us. Ruben is just a prince. For helping us out with this week, and everyone at that station is absolutely wonderful. So, you know, it's time for us to return that favor. And I promise what you will hear tonight cannot be heard elsewhere. Since we're live, you can call in during the show and be a part of the show. We're not streaming live on YouTube tonight. We will be doing that next week. I'll be posting this to YouTube, but we are live at www.hamiltonradio.net channel 2. So you can call in 609-807-2492 is the number, 609-807-2492 if you'd like to call in. Share any story that you may have. You can be anonymous if you want to talk about personal issues regarding domestic violence or anything else. You can call in and be anonymous. You don't have to say your name. I want to remind people all over New Jersey about the Bridges to Employment program. I was talking to someone today who were telling me that they have know someone who is a teacher in the Bronx, and they were comparing that the sort of, you know, the low income school system to a school system in a much more affluent neighborhood. And you know what this teacher was saying from the Bronx is that the children they start in kindergarten behind grade level because they don't get preschool. And then, you know, comparing that, like the resources that are available, like the children in the low income school district, they don't get computers. Half of them don't have proper internet connectivity in their homes. And then compare that to the affluent school where it was told to us that they have an abundance of Chromebooks. They have so many, they don't know what to do with them. And why can't those be moved over to the low income school district? But no, there's like so much red tape and bureaucracy of moving, supplies from one school system to another. It's just so wrong. And here we are sitting here with the Bridges to Employment program, which is the single best alternative school program that is in existence today. And I can't wait to be speaking about this at the Umbrella Conference on October 29th, I think it is, this month. And so if you know anyone who has experienced foster care, either currently or in the past, and either has their high school diploma or doesn't have their high school diploma, either way, needs brush up skills and wants to be on a career, doesn't want to spend their whole life flipping burgers. We have a program here that can, take young people who have a, 6th and 7th grade education, even if they've been given a high school diploma, and get them to the point where they can test properly. They can get a high school equivalency if they need it, but if they don't need it, in order to take proper vocational programs, you have to test at a certain level. And if you got a 6th grade set of skills, you can't test at that level, but we can get them there. We can get them from a 6th grade level to a 9th grade level in like 8 weeks, 16 weeks, because this is a totally individualized program. Take it seriously, please. If you know anyone or if you are someone who would benefit from this program, you can private message me on Facebook. You can call me directly at 609 306-0821, or you can email to me at greg@ageoutangels.org. And I will be happy to walk you through it. You can even make $1,000 in incentives along the way. And you can be anywhere in the state of New Jersey. Now, on to tonight's topic, the Family Practice Division of the New Jersey Administrative Office of the Courts. We refer to them fondly as AOC, the Administrative Office of the Courts, published a report available to the public now containing county and statewide New Jersey statistics on domestic violence matters brought before the courts. The report covers the period from January 1, 2018 through December 30th, 2020, and can be viewed at njcourts.gov. New Jersey has among the strongest domestic violence laws in the country. The 2019 Prevention of Domestic Violence Act defined domestic violence as committing one or more criminal offenses upon a person who is involved in or has had a relationship with the alleged perpetrator. The 19 offenses under the law include crimes of violence, but also terroristic threats, cyber stalking, and other acts of harassment. That sounds pretty thorough to me. The report in New Jersey highlights what the Administrative Office of the Courts has been doing in the area of domestic violence during the 2018 through 2020 reporting period. Examples include training and education of family division judges, managers, and domestic violence staff on such topics as teen dating, trauma, and situational couple violence. Additionally, using grant funding secured from the U.S. Department of Justice, the Administrative Office of the Court's Family Practice Division collaborate with Rutgers to provide vicinage domestic violence staff with the knowledge and skills needed to understand and address issues experienced by victims of violence. Vicinage, not an easy word to say. The judiciary uses several electronic systems to track, docket, and process domestic violence restraining orders. The Electronic Restraining Order System, or ETRO, is used by family court staff and law enforcement. In 2019 and 2020, technical enhancements and upgrades were made to ETRO to provide information faster and more efficiently to court staff and police. The report on the Prevention of Domestic Violence Acts includes data involving domestic violence filings, dispositions of restraining orders in various forms, as well as data from the municipal and criminal cases identified as related to domestic violence. Couple of interesting statistics from this report. The number of domestic violence complaints completed by local law enforcement and municipal courts increased significantly in 2020 with the COVID-19 epidemic. And of course, we were all fearful of that. During the 2015 through 2019, the municipal courts filed slightly more than 14,000 complaints each year. In 2020, are you holding onto your seat? This number shot up to 21,550. That is serious stuff. While most domestic violence cases involve women as victims, approximately 22.5% filing a complaint are men. And I think I'm just surprised to learn that the numbers, that's almost 25%, that's almost a quarter, of all domestic violence cases are men. And that's way more than I was expecting. So let me tell you about two issues that arose this week. We're working with young people in the Bridges to Employment program. And of course, what we're hoping for is that these people can have as little drama in their lives as possible so that their minds can be free and clear to learn. That's what they're there for. And so when we find that there's a situation of domestic violence, that just takes the stress level and puts it off the charts. And I'll tell you why for several reasons. But first, let me answer a question here that came in over the chat. What responsibilities do doctors and teachers have to report domestic violence? And that is an amazing question, and I'm going to try to answer it. But Robin, if you would be kind enough, do a quick Google search on that, please, and send me an answer in the chat, if you would, to what, to what Google says, what responsibilities doctors and teachers have. It's really kind of dicey. Teachers have a responsibility to report students who they notice, like welts on their arms, or strange behavior that might indicate a situation of domestic violence. But man, they are so tongue-tied. Not tongue-tied, but the better metaphor is walking on pins and needles, because man, when you get involved in a situation of domestic violence, you are just, you have to be just so careful that you aren't putting these people in a situation where their lives will be suddenly worse because of what you've done. So I can tell you that when I found out about this, I consulted a friend of mine who works in the domestic violence area at an organization locally called Woman Space. And Susan Switlick is actually going to be my guest on the show, our last show in November, to talk about domestic violence issues. And what Susan reminded me of is that in our role at Age Out Angels, we have no standing. That's that we can't bring any charges. There's nothing that we can do, really, when you get right down to it, until well, there is one thing that we can do, and that's just support the heck out of the person who is suffering in this way. What can we do to support that person? I mean, we found out that one person, just fled into the night with the clothing on her back, and trying to get herself resituated. Another person also finding a different place to live, just escaping and finding a different place to live. But here's what happens, and it's what happened in the first instance. You want to react as a caring person, as a mentor, as someone who just cares about them and wants their lives to be stable and doesn't want them to be victimized, right? So that's your initial reaction to this, is to just do something. What can I do? Can I call the police? Can I call any local agency who will come in and swoop in and save the day? And it's not what the person who's being abused frequently wants. And so I'm telling you, 99 times out of 100, you will find that the next day, after they fled out into the night, okay, after they fled out into the night, next day, 2 days later, they'll be right back with that same person. And if you get in the middle of that, you are begging to become the untrusted person. So what you need to do is just support them as best as you can, be there when they're hurting, and when they're ready, when they come to you and they say, you know what, I can't stand this anymore, I have to end this. Then that might not even be, a good enough time. But when they come to you and they say, I want you to help me, that's when you connect them with whoever you can connect them with. Woman Space, a great example. Catholic Charities probably has something going in that regard. Get them a room in Covenant House if you can. But that's the moment when you step in and connect them with a different agency who can provide, I'm not going to say treatment, but who can provide proper counseling. Because as a person who cares, you really aren't trained to provide the right kind of counseling for that kind of situation. So, understand that you have no standing, and the best thing that you can do is be there to be supportive. Now, Robin has written back to me on the chat that it depends on the state. The Federal Child Abuse Prevention Treatment Act requires each state to have provisions or procedures for requiring certain individuals to be reporters. Professionals most commonly mandated include social workers, teachers, principals, other school personnel, physicians, nurses, and other care workers. Sorry, this is scrolling just a little too quickly. Hold on. To report known or suspected instances of child abuse and neglect. Counselors, therapists, other mental health professionals, child care providers, medical examiners or coroners, law enforcement officers. And I believe in New Jersey, every citizen is a mandated reporter. Okay. But that has more to do with children. And I'm not talking about like school age children here. I'm talking about, young adults, people who are 18, late teens, early 20s, that sort of thing, who are victims of domestic violence. It's not quite the same as when you're talking about a 6, 8, 10-year-old, as far as mandatory reporting is concerned. So anyway, that's the first thing that I wanted to tell you about domestic violence, is that no matter how much you give a damn, you may probably have no standing. And what you need to do is be that supportive person. Now, so let's look at Gabby Petito's situation. And someone wrote this way better than I could ever have explained it to you. And it's a lady by the name of Julie Perkins Cantrell. She's written for the New York Times. She's written many novels, and she has a wonderful YouTube page, and she's also just a marvelous writer. Julie Perkins Cantrell is her name. Look her up. And she wrote this piece called Important Lessons Learned from Gabby and Brian. And I'm just going to read it to you because it is remarkable. As an author and advocate for survivors of domestic violence, I've learned a lot about the predictable patterns of unhealthy relationships. After years of personal experiences, research, and outreach, I've learned to recognize the telltale signs of abuse. I am not a licensed therapist, social worker, police officer, or minister, so please understand I shared my thoughts as 3 a.m. musings. When a few people asked me to make the post public, I agreed reluctantly. I had no idea this message would resonate with so many people. This has gotten 1 million views. I've worked back through the original post to explain a bit better how I'm feeling. I realize not everyone will agree with me, and I respect all opinions and views. All I ask is that we engage in respectful discourse on all sides. Thank you all. And here's how the post reads. In recent days, the tragic events involving Gabby Petito and Brian Laundrie have given us a lot to learn. This case is still under investigation, and I can only make assumptions based on the textbook patterns of abuse I've witnessed too many times to count. I also recognize that multiple families are grieving, and I have tremendous empathy for everyone involved. However, many survivors will resonate with at least some of the following insights, and I'm hoping we can use this tragedy to shift the way we as a culture approach the complicated issue of domestic abuse. Let's examine 30 important lessons this couple teaches us. 1. Followers on social media saw a smiling, happy couple full of love and wanderlust, setting out for a cross-country adventure while documenting all the joys of young life. In many cases, targets become very good at smiling through the pain. 2, when the public was shown body camera footage captured by Moab City Police Officer Daniel Robbins, he's the one who pulled Laundrie and Petito over after the 911 call on August 12th. Some viewers assumed Petito was suffering from mental illness, and Laundrie, while nervous, was the steadier of the two. Other viewers assumed both partners were equally at fault. The old "it takes two" myth doesn't really apply to most abusive situations. Some people, this is number 4, some people even assumed Petito was the abuser and Laundrie was the victim. These assumptions probably crossed everyone's mind as a possibility. They certainly did mine. Healthy-minded people tend to give others the benefit of the doubt, especially when someone is being accused of a negative act. Also, we can all understand that mental illness is a difficult situation and can tax even the kindest, most gentle of souls and the people who love them. Unfortunately, in many cases, this thought pattern leads us to assume the victim is mentally ill or that the victim is to blame for an altercation. Number 6, victim blaming. can happen even in the worst cases of abuse because we don't see the longitudinal story unfolding. What we don't see is that the target has managed to keep things together until she reached her threshold, at which time we may see her crying, yelling, or breaking down emotionally. By exhibiting those behaviors, many might assume the target is crazy, and it's natural for us to feel as if the more stable person is more trustworthy. Number 7, if we listen carefully to Laundrie's conversation with the officers, he even laughs and says she's crazy. Then that's at, by the way, at minute 1709 of the video. Then he dismisses it as a joke. Of course, he's already put this claim in the officers' minds, and by the nonchalant way he says it, many might assume it's not the first time he said these words. Number 8, so while viewers and officers start wondering if perhaps the target is crazy, the abuser plays the part of the pure, patient partner who has to deal with this irrational person. In the video, Laundrie mentions Petito's anxiety and her OCD, painting her as an unstable partner. Please note, I'm not at all justifying any physical violence against either party. No one should intentionally harm any other person, period. Number 9, a typical abuser would be skilled at convincing people that he's innocent, while in fact, he's been acting very differently behind closed doors, pushing his target to this point intentionally and feeding on her emotional break. Many abusers love to see evidence that they've hurt their target. They love to see their target in pain. For this reason, breaking the target is usually the goal from the start. In cases of abuse, it may take an abuser hours, weeks, months, or even years to break the target, but he won't stop until he gets that reaction. And then he'll point the finger and say, see, she's crazy. I'm just trying to keep her calm. And then he'll do it again and again and again. As a result, this is number 10, some people will buy into that false narrative. Even the target can be brainwashed to doubt her own truth, which may be one reason we see Petito making many excuses for Laundrie's behavior and taking the blame for everything. In contrast, we see Laundrie blaming Petito, insisting he never hit her and saying he was just trying to keep her calm. He's charming. He comes across as the loving and loyal partner. He's joking around with the officers, and he even gives one a fist bump at the end. All the while, his fiancée is at risk of being charged with domestic assault and possibly spending the night in jail. Number 12, later, we'll hear the 911 recording that, it seems, the responding officers were not fully informed of at the time. The call quotes, "I'd like to report a domestic violence dispute." The 49-second audio recording continues as the caller says, "The gentleman was slapping the girl." When the dispatcher asks him to confirm that the man was slapping the girl, the caller responds, "Yes." And then we stopped. They ran up and down the sidewalk. He proceeded to hit her, hopped in the car, and they drove off. Number 13, I'm resisting the temptation to editorialize in the middle of these because this is just so provocative. Number 13, but long before the 911 call was made public, many survivors could already see through the spin playing out on the video footage. They easily recognize the red flags because these cycles become the norm for victims of longstanding abuse. Many targets eventually become conditioned to believe everything the abuser does is her fault, covering for the abuser, accepting all the blame, trying harder to make the abuser happy. This warped reality becomes the only truth a target knows. Number 14, also it seems clear that Petito doesn't want her fiancé to be in any trouble. She'd rather pay the price and protect the man she loves. And because she probably believes he only acted this way because of her mood/behavior/anxiety/OCD/job, she doesn't want him to be blamed. This is also the norm in abusive relationships. Number 15, many experienced and well-trained officers see right through this typical pattern. Others buy the cover-up story. And sadly, because some officers are also abusers, Some side with the abuser even when they know exactly what's going on. Throughout the video, we get the sense that Officer Robbins senses that there's more to the story. Number 16, I credit the police in Petito's situation, especially Officer Robbins. The 4 responding officers, 2 of whom were park rangers, remained calm. They separated the couple. They interviewed them individually. They split them up for the night. They consulted the domestic violence shelter. Many would say they did everything right considering the information they had at the time. Number 17, I imagine the officers involved may be suffering from tremendous guilt and wondering if they could have prevented Petito's death. But I want to give credit to the officers in this case. While it's easy to look back and say maybe they should have handled things differently, knowing what we now know, I was impressed with how well they treated both Laundrie and Petito. And sadly, I was thinking how rare it is to see that level of respect and professionalism in most cases of domestic violence, particularly in the South, where I've been most involved with survivor stories. Number 18, after Petito was reported missing, many people expressed shock in response to the Laundrie family's refusal to cooperate early in the investigation. Petito reportedly lived with the Laundrie family for more than a year. Anyone can see that this family will do anything to protect their son, even at the cost of an innocent young woman who was a real part of their family and soon to be their daughter-in-law. While most of us can certainly understand parents wanting to protect their son, most would agree they crossed a moral line when his fiancée went missing. Number 19, but perhaps it goes deeper than that. Perhaps what we're seeing is a system of enablers who not only allowed their son to abuse Petito, which may have been a factor in her reported anxiety, but also a system of gaslighters who may have always been shifting the truth to keep Petito confused and make her believe she was the problem. Number 20, it's not a far stretch to assume Petito was caught in a system of abuse. And once a target is caught in that psychological web, it is extremely difficult to see a way out. Reality becomes flipped. It's also worth noting that Petito and Laundrie had been involved in various levels of a relationship since their teens. It is also commonly observed. This is also commonly observed in dysfunctional partnerships. Number 22, these immature relationships work beautifully when both partners grow together and mature emotionally. But when one wants to keep the other down, naive, and under his control, and the other is growing, learning, and maturing, it doesn't work. Number 23, we hear Petito tell the officer that Laundrie didn't think she could succeed with her travel blog. It seems clear that he didn't believe in her, and he was trying to make her doubt herself. Through the conversation, he implies that he locked her out of the van because she wouldn't calm down. But when we listen to the full video, it seems he was upset because they'd spent too much time at the coffee shop with her working on her website while he wanted to go hiking. This suggests that because she wasn't in the van when he was ready to leave, he lost his temper. In the moments that followed, the altercation became physical. Reportedly, Laundrie squeezed Petito's face with his hand, cut her down verbally, and criticized her. Some would argue that this escalating abuse typically persists until the target reacts emotionally and/or physically. If this case follows the norm, Laundrie may have been trying to break her spirit intentionally. Number 27, why? Why would you do such a thing? Again, if this case follows the typical situation, it would likely be because Petito's focus wasn't 100% on Laundrie. She had found this new job she enjoyed. She was succeeding at it, and it was allowing her to connect with other people. Remember, she'd already left her job as a nutritionist to travel around the country with Laundrie. Number 28, in a healthy relationship, the new job might be considered a positive opportunity for Petito, especially considering Laundrie admits they have very little money and not even enough to afford a hotel room to prevent his fiancée from going to jail. But in an unhealthy relationship, the abuser wants the target all to himself. And when that doesn't happen, he can become increasingly violent. Number 29, Petito now had this one little piece of her life that laundry couldn't control. So if we're looking at textbook patterns, perhaps her blog angered him. Perhaps he didn't like all the attention she was getting on social media. Perhaps he punished her for it. And then a cycle developed, even though she was doing nothing wrong by building a new career. Finally, number 30, the next thing we know, we have a missing person, a recovered body, a young man on the run, and several families destroyed. Too much grief to measure. And the truth is, it will happen again tomorrow, and the next day, and the next day, until we learn to recognize and respond to abusive situations in healthier ways. The overall takeaway: when we see someone at her emotional end during a domestic dispute, we shouldn't assume she's crazy. We shouldn't buy into the false narrative given by the abuser. We shouldn't believe the cover-up story by the target, who has been conditioned to carry all the blame and shame. And we shouldn't assume that they're going to be okay. Instead, we should all learn the difference between healthy and unhealthy relationships. We should learn to recognize the warning signs of abuse. We should engage in respectful, fact-based conversations about trauma bonds, abusive cycles, and emotional intelligence. We should be familiar with terms like gaslighting, hovering, love bombing, enabling, triangulating, and projecting. We should stop blaming targets and help them reclaim their truth. We should stop repeating the age-old myths that keep targets trapped in these dangerous and all too often deadly cycles. Finally, while I've used the most common scenario of male-on-female violence in this article, we should recognize that abuse crosses all barriers and can impact anyone regardless of gender, sexuality, ethnicity, nationality, religious affiliation, age, or socioeconomic level. And we should stop assuming these situations will get better in time. Personally, I haven't heard of one abusive relationship that became healthier. Not one. Not with therapy, not with church, not with prayer or forgiveness or complete surrender. When an abuser is determined to destroy his target, he will not stop until that until that target is erased from this world or stripped from her life. And in many cases, he'll walk away without any consequences, often taking the target's finances, home, vehicle, reputation, or even her children with him. Please don't let the next static be you or someone you love. Did I say static? I meant statistic. Be you or someone you love. For support, contact the domestic violence hotline from a safe phone. And the phone number she gives is 1-800-799-SAFE. 1-800-799-SAFE. That's 7233. Or text the word START to 88788. That's START, S-T-A-R-T, to 88788. You know, what I can't believe is that I actually got through that story without breaking up myself. I mean, that is so well written. It's scary. This lady is just an amazing, amazing writer. And if that's what she just, sort of drops out of her pen at 3 a.m., wow. I can't wait to read, what she's written when she's actually thought it through. So that being said, a couple of those things made me think about the situation that we had with Age Out Angels when we learned that they were, involved in situations of domestic violence because of that one part where Miss Cantrell says what set him off was that she was doing things that didn't involve him, that were giving her personal success. Her blog, that she was sitting in the coffee house too long working on her webpage or something. And so he couldn't control that action and he wasn't a part of it. What struck me about that is we have people in the Bridges to Employment program, young women, 18, 19, 20, 21, 2 years old, 22 years old, who are beginning to take charge of their lives. The reason they enter our program is because, number one, they realize that they want a better education. That's first and foremost. They know they aren't going anywhere in this world without an education. So whether they have a high school diploma or not doesn't matter. They want skills. Okay. That's a group of people who enter our program. Then what happens is, we give them a whole lot of private attention, and it doesn't necessarily involve the other person in their lives. It gives them something, a sense of self-respect, a sense of self-esteem that exists outside of the relationship with that individual. And I'll never forget one of the sessions that we had with one of these young ladies who is experiencing this. We were on a Zoom video call, and there was this odd sound in the background, and we're like, what? It sounded like there was like a jackhammer or something, in the background. And we finally asked her, what is that? That's just my boyfriend snoring. And when he woke up, he didn't leave the room. He was there the whole time, either, being distracting, with his snoring, or just being there. And now looking back in hindsight, making me wonder, is that something he was monitoring, so that he could know what's going on? What happened after that call was over? Was he telling her she's not going to amount to anything, and breaking her down and breaking her down? And same thing, this domestic violence issue arose right immediately after we had our first session with another young lady. This came up. It wasn't the first time, but I wonder if the fact that these people are now using the Bridges to Employment program as a resource to grow can push a situation where domestic violence already exists to a breaking point. And this is something we need to be mindful of and be very, very, very careful how we go about treating it. So I'm sort of looking forward to an opportunity where I will be able to speak with these people again and have this conversation, I think, and just make sure that Bridges to Employment isn't something that will get them in worse trouble. Not what we're looking for. You got to be so careful, because these guys react, and they react violently and strongly, and so that's all we're going to talk about that tonight. I want to move on. If you have anything to say about it. Oh, I see something's come in over the chat. The Penal Code of California, which mandates reporting of patients with injuries from assaultive or abusive conduct, is not specific to intimate partners of violence, but covers patients with all suspicious injuries. So in other words, California is saying that if you well, I guess it's if you show up at hospital, doctor, something like that, patients, it says patients with injuries from assaultive or abusive conduct, that if it doesn't necessarily have to be from an intimate partner. They are mandating that it get reported from anywhere, and that is in the state of California. So thanks, Robin, for doing that research, and we'll do more on that and get back to you in subsequent weeks, because we're going to be covering this topic the entire month of October. But for a minute, speaking of violence, I want to talk about vaxxing and anti-vaxxing. Anti-vaxxing is the correct way to say it, because it's really kind of reached a fever pitch, don't you think? And what I want to tell you is that it's just not worth it to fight with somebody over whether they're vaxxed or whether they're not vaxxed. And I'll tell you why. It's because we're all going to get it. We're all going to get COVID. We're all going to be exposed to it. Whether or not we get it, of course, that's dependent on a whole bunch of scientific stuff that goes on with each individual's body and how the antibodies respond and all that stuff. But the fact is that we are all going to be exposed to it at some point or other. And I'll tell you why. It's got something to do with the anti-vaxxing and stuff, but it's got, what it is the children. The children are going to spread this thing like wildfire. And the mistake, if you want to talk about mistakes, the mistake that was made was not producing a vaccine for the children in time for the school year, because the kids are going to go to school. And, and if there aren't incredible outbreaks in school right now, the only reason there aren't is because they're not doing enough testing. That's the only reason. Now, kids, they don't always show it. But, then again, some of them do. The ones who do are going to call attention to it. The ones who don't are not going to call attention to it. And it's just going to be running rampant. That's what's going to happen. So, the anti-vaxxers, well, let's talk about some of the reasons why people are anti-vaxxers, okay? Because they're not all assholes, all right? I know some of them are, because they're just being obstinate. They're just saying, whatever the government says, we're not going to do it. You can't tell us what to do. And that's infantile. So put those guys aside, because, you're not going to change an asshole. Okay. They're going to stay the same. But many of those people are not. I mean, you could be talking about 60 million people in this country. They're not all assholes. Okay. And they shouldn't be characterized that way. I'll give you a couple of great examples. A lot of people don't believe the pharmaceutical companies. They have no faith in the pharmaceutical companies. And you cannot change their minds by saying, yeah, but you got, the measles, mumps, rubella vaccine. You didn't get polio because you got the polio vaccine, didn't you? And that's lovely. I'm glad we didn't get polio. A good friend of mine was one of the last people to get polio. And believe me, he wishes there was a polio vaccine established in time for when he didn't have a chance to be vaccinated before he got polio. God bless him. But that's not a reason for a modern person today to have faith in the drug companies. Two things come to mind. Number one, if you're as old as I am, you remember things like thalidomide. You remember when women were given speed during pregnancy because they were, lethargic or something like that. In fact, during pregnancy, we learned about a drug called DES that then caused the next generation to be infertile. So, if a young lady says to you, no, I'm not getting vaccinated because I don't trust the pharma companies, and I might want to have a baby someday, and who knows what the long-term effects will be, then you can't look that person in the eye and say you're being stupid. That's not a fair position, because you're not a scientist either. And the fact is, what we know is that drug companies are for-profit organizations. Now, understand that I'm giving you the devil's advocate side of the anti-vaxxer here, but I've gotten two, and I'm going for my third soon, and I've had my seasonal flu shot as well. So don't think for one second that I subscribe to this, but I understand how other people would. Pharmaceutical companies are publicly traded for-profit companies. They have a fiduciary responsibility to their shareholders to make as much money as possible. And if they don't do that, they can be held liable and taken to court and put in jail by their shareholders. They can be sued in civil court. There's all kinds of things that can happen to them if they don't do everything they can to maximize profits. That's what life is like in a capitalist society, and it's the society we subscribe to. Okay, we are not socialists, we are capitalists. That's the pharmaceutical company's mandate. They're not the enemy, it's their mandate. So not believing them, well, let me give you a perfect example. I just read Johnson & Johnson's annual report. Johnson & Johnson, too big to fail, man. They are huge. If you want to buy a great stock, invest in Johnson & Johnson. You can't go wrong. Do you know they have $5 billion a year, billion with a B, set aside for litigation and claims. I mean, think about it. They've gone through opioids claims. They've gone through, remember the powder that contained talc? It was called, it will come to me. It starts with a C, clandestine, something like that. It was the powder that was causing uterine cancer, baby powder, basically baby powder that was 15% zinc, but the rest of it was talc, and the talc was causing uterine cancer. $5 billion a year they set aside. So you can't hurt them. And every time a new product comes out, their legal team gets together and they do a risk benefit analysis. Okay, they do an actuarial study and they think, well, if this comes back to bite us in the ass, how much will it cost us versus how much money will we make doing it? That's how business is run. So if you blame somebody for not taking a vaccine because they don't trust the pharmaceutical company, then you might be the naive person in that situation. Okay, that's just something that we need to accept. So, you know, I mean, that's just one reason. There are other things that when you go back in time and you think, wow, if they had just done things sooner. One of the things that they could have done is really develop the testing. If like, think about this, we might not have had to all stay home forever if they had developed, you know, the fabulous test kits that would tell you on the spot if you were positive for COVID. Then, like when you talk about family get-togethers and stuff like that, everybody swabs their nose before they get in the car. If you test positive, sorry, you stay home. If you test negative, you go to the party. You're there with everybody who tests negative, whether they're vaccinated or not, doesn't really matter because you've all tested negative. If somebody lies, you beat the living shit out of them when you find out because they would deserve it. Nobody would go to jail for beating the crap out of someone who was purposefully spreading a disease. New messages are coming in over the chat. What will you do to mitigate Bridges from causing domestic violences because the partner gets more independent? That is a great question. And you know, what we're going to do is we're going to consult people who know what to do about that. We're not going to guess. We're certainly not going to guess on the air, and we're not going to guess privately. Another one, jobs are encouraging people to come to work if exposed. This is a friend was exposed. They made, oh, listen to this, freaking employers. They made him stay home, but wouldn't pay him unless he actually had COVID. He was exposed. Many people would not have stayed home if they didn't have symptoms. Turns out he had it, but was vaccinated and ultimately had mild symptoms when he got it. So here's the thing, like he calls the company and says, you know, I may have been exposed. I may have it. So I'm going to go out and get tested and I can't come into work. The company says to him, well, here's the thing. If we'll pay you if it turns out you have it. But if it turns out you don't have it, then you're just taking advantage of us and we're not going to pay you for that day. So once that gets around the company that that's how they operate, would you call them and tell them that you had COVID? Hell no. You would go in and go to work and infect everybody else if you need the money badly. And what we're talking about here, there's a whole lot of jobs out there where all people have to do is miss a day or two. And not only do they not have the money to pay the rent, but they end up losing their jobs. Caldescin, thank you, whoever wrote that in. Caldescin is the name of the powder that Johnson & Johnson got in a lot of trouble for. And ended up paying out millions of dollars in claims. Didn't bother them. They had $5 billion on tap. That's to cover the legal costs and the claims. So, you know, there are reasons that people have to not being vaccinated. If people say, I got it, I have antibodies developed. Well, it would be nice if those people would take the antibody test. You can do that. LabCorp just told me the other day that they're offering it. The test for antibodies. And if you have sufficient antibodies, why should you take a vaccine? On the other hand, and I'm going to be perfectly honest with you guys, I grew up in the 60s and 70s. and I put more crap into my system than you could possibly imagine. Not only that, but I ate at McDonald's, and they have more garbage in their foods that will kill you long term. So you know what? If there's a vaccine out there, just give it to me. I don't want to debate it. I don't want to discuss it. Just stick it in my arm and have a nice day. Do I get a free cookie? Thank you very much. And that's all the time we have for tonight, ladies and gentlemen. We'll talk more about what do you call it? The new form of solutions-based case working, and see how that may interact with domestic violence. I'll be happy to tell you what we decide to do as far as the Bridges to Employment program is concerned, how we intend to handle that next week. So join me, okay? Also, I'll have some guests next week here to talk about foster youth and child welfare. So please mark this date in your calendar for next Monday, 6:05 p.m., live streaming on our YouTube channel. And until then, let's make this week. Wait, before I say that, I forgot to thank Ruben. I forgot to thank Robin. I forgot to thank the people who do our music. There's so much on my mind tonight. Angel Fire, who does our music, and Ms. Cantrell, who provided that unbelievable article. I want you all to go to YouTube, and I'm sorry, to Facebook, and look her up. Her name is Julie Perkins Cantrell. She is a gem. See you all next week. Let's make this week the best week ever. Good night, everyone.